Okay, so thank you very much for this opportunity, and good afternoon to you. I guess it's good morning here, but afternoon to you. I'd like to pick up where Paolo left off and to tell you a little bit about our implementation strategy and how we are actually implementing natural capital accounting through this global partnership that Paolo mentioned. So, Paul, if you could go to the next slide, please.
I'll need to find, just bear with me whilst I find your presentation. Right, got that. That's it, slideshow. Okay. Is that the, yeah. Yep.
Yeah. So, this idea of natural capital accounting, or what is commonly known as green accounting, is not new. It's been around for many years, as Paolo mentioned. In fact, more, at the first Rio conference, it was mentioned that countries should start adopting this approach or this framework. And so we often get asked, why, if this idea has been around for so long, why has it not been widely implemented? And the reviews we have done highlight 4 issues that have led to poor implementation. One is a lack of policy link, and we really think this is the most important reason why there has been a lack of uptake. The way this field has developed, it's really been supply-driven. So it's, UN Statistical Commission has gone to its counterparts, which are statistical agencies in countries, and worked with them to develop accounts because these countries didn't have them. But very little effort was made to actually demonstrate the usefulness of these accounts. How can they actually be used for policy? And because of that lack of demonstration of how these can be used for policy, there has been this lack of uptake. Then up till very recently, there was actually no agreed methodology for the adoption of these accounts. Now, statistical organizations in charge of a country's GDP are very risk-averse. They will not adopt experimental methodologies that could affect the country's economic outlook. And so till we had this internationally agreed methodology, there was a lot less willingness in countries to adopt. And last year, in 2012, one part of what we consider natural capital accounts for the material natural resources, was approved by the UN Statistical Commission as an international standard. So now, that one obstacle has been removed as well. There is still, though, no agreed methodology for ecosystem accounting, and I'll come to that later. Thirdly, there's been limited capacity in developing countries, although, even in developed countries, because few people are, some countries are implementing, but not everybody. And also in the research community, this was an interesting issue that was initially picked up maybe 10, 15 years ago, but lately there has not been as much work done in the research community on natural capital accounting as well. And finally, there was, until recently, a lack of leadership from the international organizations on, saying that we need measures of development going beyond GDP. But although that has changed largely, on the basis of the SAN, Stiglitz and Fitoussi report that came out and argued very strongly why we need to look beyond GDP. Paul, if you could go to the next slide. So this partnership that we have, what will it do and how will it help address some of these constraints? On the policy link, which we really think is the most critical issue for us to address, when we work, and I'll again talk to you a little bit more about this, when we work with countries, we identify which accounts they should build on the basis of what policies are relevant for that country. So we directly show this policy link, and then once the accounts are built, we work as well with the countries to do the policy application. So we don't just stop once the account has been built by the country. In terms of, there's still no global standard for ecosystem accounting. We have established a policy and technical experts committee to try and help work with us to develop this methodology to pilot and test different methods, and I'll come to that as well, to help address the issue of limited capacity, where we have a global partnership where we are providing training and other technical capacity building help. And then in terms of the lack of leadership, the World Bank at the highest levels of our management is behind this issue and, is promoting this issue. So just to begin at that last, Paul, if you could move to the next slide. To begin with that last issue about, countries don't want to do this by themselves because this is something new. So there is a need to push this idea forward. There is a need to have a global community of both developed and developing countries. And so what this list shows you is the 68 countries who have now signed our partnership and have committed to implementing natural capital accounting. Of these 68, 38 countries are developing countries, and they're joining the partnership. It's not all the time. So, for example, Indonesia, who you see on that list, literally joined the partnership just yesterday. So we have now a real, group, a very large group of countries who want to do this and want to do this together and move forward on this together. So I think there is that consensus now that we need to look beyond GDP is there, as reflected in this interest. Could you move to the next slide? So how are we working with these countries? So this diagram sort of shows you that we have, this group of countries, some of whom I showed you who have, what is listed as the WAVES GP countries are those 68 countries that I just showed you the list of. But there are other potential partners who have expressed interest and who are, in the process of joining our partnership. But in terms of, at the moment, our focus is on working closely with the 68 countries who are part of the WAVES Global Partnership. Of the 68 countries, we work very intensively. We provide substantial technical support and assistance to what we call our core implementing countries. We have established a number of criteria by which a country becomes a core implementing country, and I can talk to you about that if there's interest. And then for the other countries, largely, developed countries who we don't support through technical assistance, but also academic organizations are what we call participating countries, but also participating partners. And in this category, we don't provide detailed technical assistance, but we help provide access to training materials. We, organize global workshops where these countries can participate. And so there is a sense that there's a global community that they are part of. Next slide, please. So in terms of who are our core implementing countries, at the moment, and this is what Paolo had mentioned to you, when we started this partnership, our idea was to really work intensively in 5 countries, 5 developing countries, and then to show proof of concept and then to scale up. But because there has been such an expression of interest from these 38 other developing countries, that we have to sort of change that plan a little, and we will be scaling up from the 5 current implementing countries, that is Botswana, Madagascar, Philippines, Colombia, and Costa Rica. We will be scaling up to 20 over the next 18 months, and these are the countries that are listed. I mean, this is proposed, and we're working closely with these countries, but till the work has begun actually in Guatemala, in Morocco. Like I mentioned, Indonesia has just joined yesterday, so the work is yet to begin, but work is also ongoing in Rwanda and Ghana. So the next 6, next 5 have definitely started, and then we are exploring how to work with the rest. Next slide, please. So then, I've given you a sense that there is a global movement and a lot of interest across different countries to do this. I'd like to draw your attention a little bit to how we approach this issue of the policy link to overcome this big issue that had previously not led to an uptake of this methodology or this framework. So what this shows you is sort of a diagram of how we get started in different countries. So there are 2 phases typically. One is a preparation phase, and the other, of course, is the implementation phase. In the preparation phase, one of the key aspects of this, and which makes it also very challenging, is that we need both users of the data, but also suppliers of the data to be engaged in this process. And we need a lead agency who has convening power or has cross-sectoral mandate. So, typically if this program is led by ministries of environment, then they don't have the authority or the convening power to call on other ministries or even call the statistical organizations to meetings to enable this to be implemented. So in most of our countries, the lead agency is either a planning ministry or a ministry of finance, because they have the authority to convene. And then we have the statistical organizations, the ministries of environment, and other line agencies also involved, and we establish a national steering committee that has decision-making power for this program, and they're all part of that process. So setting up the institutional process is a very critical part of getting started in our countries. Then the next step is we typically do what we call a scoping up study, where we first identify, what are the key policy questions for which natural capital accounts can provide the right information. And then we also assess data and technical capacity. And on the basis of that, we develop a work plan working closely with the country on what needs to be done, which account, for example, is best. One thing I should mention, unlike the system of national accounts where you have to implement the entire account, the system of environmental and economic accounts or natural capital accounts are modular. So a country can choose whether to implement just water accounts or just forest accounts or mineral accounts, depending on the policy priorities in that country. So the work plan identifies which accounts should be built, what policy questions need to be addressed, and how to go about this. And this work plan is then approved by the National Steering Committee, and then, of course, the implementation begins. So what I wanted to draw your attention to here is both the institutional structure, but also to the policy focus. Next slide, please. So this gives you, this slide gives you a little bit of a sense of some of the policy questions that we are working close with these countries, or these countries have identified as priorities for them. So let me just focus on this issue of hydropower, because I think I came into part of Bhaskar's talk, and I think he was talking to you about his project area in the Himalayas, which is also where we are working. Now, in that region, and in particular in the Indian state of Himachal Pradesh, hydropower is one of the main growth sectors for the state. It's the biggest source of revenue for the state. And what they are finding is that the efficiency of the hydropower sector is reduced due to siltation problems. They often have to shut down these hydropower facilities because the silt levels are too high. And what we are doing with the state is to show them the link between forest management or the ecosystem services that forests provide in terms of silt or soil retention, and how improvement of the management or provision of that service can then help improve the efficiency of the hydropower sector. And the ecosystem accounts are set up to do that. So that's the policy question is, how do we improve the efficiency of the hydropower sector through, and we are using ecosystem accounts to help show them how that can be done. Next slide, please. So finally, so I talked, the four issues I had mentioned about lack of leadership, the policy links, the lack of methodology, and the lack of capacity. So I've talked to you about the leadership issue and the policy links, and I'd like this final slide talks about some of the things that we are trying to do in terms of methodology development and knowledge management. So for methodology development, there is no standard at the moment for ecosystem accounting. So looking at a geographical area and mapping all the services that are produced by that ecosystem, and then linking that to the system of national accounts. That methodology, there's a framework that the UN has proposed, but it has not been tested and not piloted at the moment. So that's one thing that we are trying to do. We have a policy and technical experts committee that guides our work in this area. And one of the main things that this committee has identified that we should focus on is on piloting ecosystem accounts. So at the moment, we have projects ongoing in India, in Peru, in Indonesia, Netherlands, Norway, and Benin, where we are testing some of these methodologies and hope to then inform the UN process to develop standards for ecosystem accounting. We are also trying to, in terms of methodology development, we are trying to, reinvigorate the research community around these issues. So we're working to engage these excellent, research networks, regional research networks in Latin America, which is the LACIP, in South Asia, SANDI, and in East Asia, EPSI, to see how we can work with them to increase the uptake of these issues and research amongst researchers. In terms of knowledge management and capacity development, we have a website which Paulo had put up, and I will put up as well. But we really need to move that website to a knowledge platform where we provide a lot more, information on how countries can go about doing this. We're also trying to work to establish regional communities of practice, so that the first one we are hoping to do is in Latin America, because we have Mexico, Brazil, Chile have also signed signed and joined our program, but we are not able to provide substantial support to them. So to engage them, we are trying to establish a community of practice where they can interact through that. And finally, the other way we share knowledge is through global workshops and regional workshops. And I just wanted to let you know that we are planning a big workshop on forest accounts, on both the policy applications as well as a lot of how do you build these accounts early next spring. But we will be doing similar workshops for water accounts, for mineral accounts, and then hopefully for ecosystem accounts as well. So that's the last. Can you move to the next slide? And so that's it for me. Thank you. And here's the URL for our website if anybody wants more information. But I'm also here to answer questions. Thank you.
Okay. Yep. Right. If you can give that video back. Right. Okay. We can now try to have questions. And in theory, this will work. And my comment would be, starting off, that your presentation actually picked up a lot of the themes which we had in the morning about how a lot of this work is context specific, and you've been giving a really useful introduction to, you've got a specific question, which is how these concepts incorporate into national systems of accounts, and how that has influenced the way that you frame the question, the way that you're delivering it. So I'm just going to open it up to the floor for questions. I'll give Georgina.
Thank you. So I've got a quite specific question, actually, which I don't know which one of you would answer. But when you're doing the ecosystem valuation for the national accounts, are you valuing the present value? Does it look at what a patch of forest is how it's benefiting people this year in terms of income or present values for carbon or whatever it might be? Or is it like the World Bank, the Inclusive Wealth Report, where that is in some way projected over all time and all people? And the reason I ask this question is that one of the concerns that ecosystem ecologists have is that the value of an ecosystem changes over time, that what we use it for today may be not what we use it for tomorrow. And so if you just look at the present uses and values, you could be seriously underestimating all the potential futures for that particular ecosystem. The example in this country is peat bogs, which were once very valuable for fuel, and then people stopped using them, they turned to farmland and were useless, and now suddenly they're valuable again as a carbon store. So it was just about whether it's present values or the inclusive wealth type approach.
So,
you want me to take a few questions before we answer, or?
I think take them one at a time at the moment. So if you want to answer that to start off with, and I think Paolo wants to say something as well. But if you go first.
Okay, thanks, Georgina, for that question. Just to clarify, the national income accounts, and so similarly the natural capital accounts or system of environmental accounts, are a snapshot of what is today. So it's, but in particular, the flow accounts will measure how the resources are being used today. But once you have that information, it's very important to do the analysis that you're mentioning through looking at different scenarios on what is the value, could be the value of these resources in the future. And frankly, what is, the value of the stock. So once you've measured how they're being used today and the value of the flow today, you have to be able to come up with the value of the stock of that resource. You have to then project out into the future, which is what the Natural Inclusive Wealth Report does, and which is what the Changing Wealth of Nations work that the Wealth We Do does as well. Now, under that, once you have that basic information, you should be doing a number of scenario analysis to say if it was used differently or managed differently, what would the value be? And what would the value be to different people? So, for example, just to say quickly, we have done some work looking to estimate the marine fish wealth of nations. And if you look at, the value today or the rental, that it's negative or zero in most cases because of the overfishing issue. So what we do is once we have that snapshot, we say that if you were to change the management of these resources, how much more would that be worth? So it's very important once you have that snapshot to do the second bit of analysis to say how the value could change under different circumstances. I'll stop there.
Paolo, did you want to add?
Just to complement the information,
You've still got your microphone on.
It's complementary because for the stocks, the exercise will be done as you say, and for the flows, information is contingent to the year. But the combination of the two are fundamental because you can understand in time whether you are basically diminishing if your stock is basically creating on that one, or it's basically diminishing on the information which is given intertemporal, which is the register next to it. So they are complementary. So you have to have both exercises depending on the nature of the service under consideration.
Right, Bhaskar.
Hi, Urvashi, it's Bhaskar.
Hi, Bhaskar, good to see you.
Thank you. I wanted to ask you about the first part of it, creating the structures within which the demand for this kind of process is being generated. And you described it in some detail, which was very helpful. But I wonder how what you candidly think about how enduring it's going to be, because you did describe the creation of a set of institutional structures led by a lead agency, which appeared to be purposefully responding to this agenda. Do you think those would endure if there weren't this particular wealth accounting partnership? And in some senses, that's the question about the longer term commitment of the countries that are participating in this process for it to truly become demand driven and not be another supply intervention, which you quite correctly pointed out is one of the reasons why a number of these initiatives haven't worked in the past. So if you're allowed to, even within your office, drop the drop the World Bank uh, supply side and think about where is the demand, and is this demand one that you can sustain beyond the lifetime? Will these countries run with it once you've supplied the technical expertise, or will it continue to require the interventions of the external implementing agencies to sustain it?
Good question.
Great question, and I think this is really at the crux of our partnership, because we recognize that in the past this hasn't been there hasn't been uptake because of it being supply driven. So we have to address this issue. Now, first of all, it's not our partnership is not just for this year or next year. It's a 5-year partnership, and it started off maybe 2 years ago as a 5-year partnership, and it's already been extended. So this is something where, it's a long-term engagement. In every country where we work for 4 to 5 years. So it's not a 1 year, it's not one study, it's really effort to establish capacity in the country. Now, the way we're approaching it is that if we can show the usefulness of this tool, then there will be uptake of this. And if we don't show its usefulness, then once the partnership goes away, the use of the tool will go away. And that's why when we begin in a country, we do a lot of stakeholder analysis to understand, we do a lot of consultation to bring a lot more people on board to say, how can you use this so that they can start demanding this information. Now, I also want to say that this is not supply driven in the sense countries want this tool. Botswana has been so dependent on its diamond revenues. They are looking to diversify their economy away from diamonds. Now, number of the growth sectors they're considering, nature-based tourism, frankly looking at other subsoil assets apart from diamonds, all depend heavily on water. And this tool can help them understand whether they can actually pursue the growth path in all, and support growth in all those sectors. So we are trying to address issues that are truly, the country identifies as being critical. So we hope that if we show, not just we show, as the country is working on this and they see the usefulness of this tool, if other people start using it more, it will become more sustainable. Of course, only time will tell if that is actually the case. But the fact is that we recognize this as a big constraint, and we hope that the strategy we have in place will help address this.
Okay, I'm going to throw my lowball question at you. You know the one that's coming. You've got a president at the World Bank who says that everything that the bank does is about poverty alleviation. So both from that context and my ESPA context, describe how you think this wealth accounting at the sort of the national system of accounts is going to contribute to poverty alleviation in some of those growing number of developing countries.
So, this is Paul, I could go on and on. I think we have to keep this question, my answer short. And so, absolutely, our work is directly linked because, first of all, let's just think about it. What we care about, or what, the goals that have been established for the World Bank of poverty alleviation and shared prosperity, it's not just a question of alleviating poverty today and then that poverty comes back tomorrow. So it has to be sustainable alleviation of this poverty, right? And so sustainable management of these resources is often critical, and tracking whether that is happening will be very critical in this process. that's one thing. Then, what we are trying, there was recently a paper coming out of the World Bank called Growth is Still Good for the Poor. I don't know if people have seen this. That has looked across a number of countries, panel data set, to look at, what is good for poverty alleviation, what leads to, so is it the, the effort on providing social safety nets, or is it pursuing growth? And they find that 3/4 of the poverty alleviation that's taken place across the world can be attributed to the fact that those countries were also growing economically. And a lot of what we are doing is helping support sustainable economic growth in countries. So that will also help, alleviate poverty. And then finally, as I think Bhaskar was alluding, we have to understand the winners and the losers, and often it's the poor who are very dependent on these resources who may end up losing when these resources are used for other purposes, maybe in some of these growth sectors. And so what these accounts can do is also help identify, who are the winners and losers, so that policies can then be developed that address this disparity. So I think, obviously we can go into details on this, but broadly, we see what we are doing very much consistent with the poverty alleviation and shared prosperity goals. So on shared prosperity, let me give you one example. A number of the countries where we are working, the big source of revenue has been mineral exploitation. And what our work does, or building mineral accounts does, both helps identify how much of the rent from these minerals is actually being captured within the country, how much of it is being lost to multinational companies, how is this rent being reinvested, is it being used to build other forms of capital. So all of these are issues, that help address shared prosperity as well. So we see what we do very much consistent with those goals.